Support for the Capital Connection comes from
United University Professions, representing 37,000 academic and professional employees at SUNY campuses and teaching hospitals across New York State. Frederick E. Cole, President, uupinfo.org.
It's the Capital Connection. Hi, I'm David Guistina, the erstwhile producer of the program, filling in for our usual host, Alan Chartock, this week. And joining us is a regular contributor to this program, a statewide official who's never failed to appear and answer the questions. I'm talking about New York State Comptroller Tom DiNapoli. Welcome back, Tom.
David, it is great to be back, and you give that Alan Chartock my best, but I know you are going to fill in quite ably. We're going to have a great discussion.
Well, we are, and I will pass on that message. I know Alan regrets not being able to be with you today. Let's start here. We're still waiting on an agreement on the state budget as it stands. I'm not sure about this. I thought I'd just ask you this question off the top. Are you involved in any way in those negotiations?
Well, it's a very good question because many people assume that the controller, especially being the money person, is intimately involved in the budget negotiations. In fact, the opposite is the case. So the decisions on budget really are totally the purview of the legislature and the governor. Obviously, our role is to monitor what's going on. You know, we comment on the executive budget when the governor presents it. We'll comment on the final budget agreement when that's hammered out. And, of course, once the legislature and the governor decide how much money to spend and where to spend it, we're the ones that have to follow up and make sure the payments are done appropriately. We'll do audits of programs and spending. But very much to your very important question, although we are involved very much with the spending of the state money, we are not involved with the policy choices on how much money to spend and where to put that money. And I respect that. I mean, my as you know well, I was a legislator for 2 decades where the role was having an opinion about every budget item and being involved in, to the extent that rank and file members were involved with negotiations. As controller, I've always had to remind myself I am not a legislator. And people come to us, David, all the time and say, take a position on this program. And I said, well, you know what? That's my role is an independent, oversight role. So we can't be like a legislative advocate. So short answer, no, we are not directly involved. We are not part of the three people in the room. We're not part of, the conferences to go over, agreements that are being hammered out. But we're watching closely what's going on. And our role in this process now is reminding the legislature and the governor, when we don't have a budget in place, what kind of state programs and spending are in jeopardy without a budget in place. And certainly the issue of our state employees continuing to be paid is very, very important. So we are always putting out notices way in advance as to when we need a budget extender so that people can continue to be paid. David, our public employees, our state employees that are keeping the state going no matter what, their paycheck should not be held hostage to what's going on with budget deliberations. Legislators can't get paid under the law, but we have to make sure our state employees are getting paid so they can keep doing their job.
We're speaking with State Comptroller Tom DiNapoli of New York. Tom, let me ask you this, though. When the executive budget comes out from the governor and then the final budget will come out, when you look at that, when you do your analysis, would you describe yourself as a fiscal conservative?
Well, I think there's much about the role of controller that lends itself to being, a bit more cautious on the spending side and even on the revenue side. And I think that's not, unique to, to my tenure. I think that's always been the role the controller's office played. Because look, the controller is trying to keep a view of the big picture, and when you're a legislator trying to close down a budget, very often what you need to do is make sure everybody gets a piece of the pie, right, across the state. And often it's easier to come up with an agreement if you're spending more money, right? You're trying to meet various needs and competing needs. And that creates, from my point of view, a concern that we don't look as carefully as we should at the implications of spending decisions made today as to what's going to happen next year, 2 years, 4 years down the road. And I think that's part of what got New York, behind in years past. Well, the challenge this year, David, is that, the state's been in pretty good shape. Tax revenue, as we've been reporting and you've been following, coming in stronger than projected. The federal relief money, as the COVID relief, has had a huge impact. Billions of dollars has kept us afloat. But the economy is less certain right now, and the federal money is being spent down. And already, before this budget agreement has been hammered out, the Division of Budget was projecting out-year budget gaps, coming up again. So my concern is when they finally break the logjam and start deciding on the budget, to get the budget done, are they going to be spending more money perhaps than was first intended to keep as many people happy as possible? Or the other consequence, David, which is a pattern in New York, okay, if we don't quite have the money, we'll borrow more to deal with the needs that that we want to address. So then you run into that problem of creating out your budget gaps, number one, and number two, contributing to what is already a very, very high debt burden that we carry in New York. And if we're going into, hopefully not, but if we are going into a recessionary time or an economic downturn, you don't want to be overspending and you don't want to be over-obligated on debt. And I fear somewhat, because there's all these other issues that are being debated, no one's really looking at that big picture of what's happening with the budget per se.
You referenced earlier tax collections and the state pulling in higher than expected tax collections still, but lower than last year. I wonder about taxes in general. We've asked you this question before. Do most New Yorkers pay their taxes?
Oh, sure. Yes, absolutely. And I think you point out an important point, though, about the tax revenue. While we've been reporting we're coming in strong versus projections, there's no doubt when you look at the numbers, it is less in terms of the overall numbers. One of the complications, though, with our reporting these days is you've got this, I don't want to get too technical, but you got this workaround that was put in place to allow certain individuals and entities to avoid the cap on state and local tax deduction, that $10,000 limit that was part of the tax reform a number of years ago. So that kind of throws off, some of our numbers in terms of comparing it to years past. But no, New Yorkers, do pay their taxes, personal income tax particularly. That is our strongest revenue source. There are always some issues about sales tax and the underground economy, but even sales tax, we've seen continued strength. Some of that is inflation related for sure, but we're still seeing people spending money, and we're still seeing jobs being created. There's hiring going on, so that's helping payrolls get boosted and the withholding numbers. So yeah, I mean, look, the other issue, David, I think implied in your question is although people are paying their taxes, are all the taxpayers staying in New York? And that's where there's a fair discussion going on right now about taxpayer migration. There's no doubt that we've been losing some people. I don't think it's as dramatic as some of the critics, suggest. But there's also no doubt that when you look at the taxpayer migration, it tends to be people at the upper end, right? So again, I don't think it's as dramatic as critics, would suggest. And certainly the fact that our tax collections are coming in higher than projected, we're not feeling it in the way that some may suggest. But I do think it's a trend we have to be concerned about. Keep in mind for the truly upper income folks, right, the top 1% of taxpayers, they account for more than 40% of the personal income tax revenue that comes into the state, that the rest of us benefit from, the money for schools and senior programs and child care and health care and so on. So I do think we need to be mindful of the fact that this issue of taxpayer migration, which the data has always lagged, right? So I can't tell you what's happening today. We have some sense of what might have happened 2 years ago, but we need to get a better handle on those numbers, and are we really losing people? And there are different reasons why some people move out of state. some would cite the tax burden as part of it because we are a higher tax state than most other states. And if you live in New York City, you're paying a combined rate on the personal income tax, even higher than California. So I do think we need to be very mindful of the fact that we want people here because, to your point of your question, they are paying their taxes, but we want them to be here so they can pay their taxes so the rest of us can benefit from it. Wall Street as well. We put out a Wall Street report on the bonuses. The bonuses are back to pre-pandemic levels, so it's not like we're way behind. But when the bonuses are down from Wall Street, when they're not doing so well, that impacts on our tax revenue as well. So a lot of moving parts, and with the economic uncertainty out there, it really makes predicting on the revenue side a bit more challenging.
Well, since I studied under Alan Chartock, I might cause a slight bit of trouble here. I think I heard you admit on some level that maybe taxes in New York are high enough that it does force businesses and some folks to move to other states like Florida. I mean, for example, we know the Pagulas, the Buffalo Bills owners, spend most of their time down in Florida, and that's for the tax benefit, right?
Yeah. And I think during COVID, you saw that dynamic accelerate because people found it easy to communicate or be spend more of their time down there, maybe not totally withdrawing from paying New York taxes, but able to do business from there. I think the real problem with trying to figure out taxpayer behavior is knowing what the tipping point is, where you really do create not just a trickle of people leaving, but a stampede. And I think that's where, we still have a lot of analysis that we have to make. Look, there's still a lot of rich folks that want to be in New York. And David, I could tell you as much as anecdotally we can name wealthy folks that are moving down to Florida. I can give you the names of some folks that they've been there for a while, and they want to come back to New York because, with all due respect to Florida, it's not New York, and there are many reasons to be in New York. And there are many people who, in fact, their lifestyle is not going to be overly compromised if they have to pay a bit more in taxes. But I do think that you have to be concerned about the tipping point. And I would also argue it's not just the super wealthy that we need to be concerned about. It's kind of those folks in the middle or the slightly upper middle. Those are the folks who I think really may be feeling some of this burden, and we don't want to have New York become a state of very wealthy people and very poor people. We don't want to squeeze out the middle that really has been the backbone, for the state. So that's why I think, we all need to be mindful of it. It's sometimes easy to say, well, we're running short. There are plenty of people making lots of money in New York. They could afford to pay more. It's usually not quite as simple as that.
Yeah, but State Comptroller Tom DiNapoli, haven't the middle class been kind of getting it in the neck for a long time now, not just in New York, but around the country?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, unfortunately, I think you're right. It's not just income tax. It's the impact of inflation has been particularly hard on the middle class. You look at, what people are paying for food, going out to restaurants now, not even the fancy ones. You see the big price increase there. Gasoline up and down, right? People, depend on cars for their transportation in most parts of the state. And the middle class doesn't have the reserves. I mean, how many people who I would define as middle class are actually still living paycheck to paycheck? They're fortunate to have a paycheck. They're not living on welfare relief, but they're just a paycheck away from perhaps not being able to afford the rent in a given month or not being able to afford the mortgage. That's a real problem, and I do think it is, as you point out, a national phenomena, is not limited to New York by any means. But the middle class is that's what fuels most of the consumer spending. That's who the folks are who keep our neighborhoods strong and who fill all these important positions, be it in the private sector or the public sector. When the middle class is lost, that's when we have a real problem. And by the way, there are political implications of that. When the middle class is not happy, the middle class will often express their opinions at the polls, and some years that hurts Democrats, some years that hurts Republicans.
Well, let's talk about the bottom half of the economic spectrum for a moment, where often mere crumbs fall. A recent Office of Budget and Policy analysis finds that approximately 1 in 10 where about 800,000 New York households experience food insecurity. I love that phrase, Tom. It means they're hungry. From 2019 to 2021, and an increasing number say they face food insufficiency since the summer of 2021. The report makes 6 recommendations, but the idea, and obviously that's 2021, we're in 2023 now. We continue to hear about this food insecurity and the idea that people can go hungry in America, or let's just make it real specific, in New York State. It seems a little bit appalling, doesn't it?
It's scary. That came out of our budget and policy shop. And, I said to our folks, let's take a look at not just the traditional issues we look at, but coming out of COVID, let's look at those who have been the most vulnerable, and in many cases got more vulnerable as a consequence of COVID. So we did a report on poverty. We did that report on food insecurity. We're looking at other issues related to health care and housing as we move forward. It's a real concern, and very often you're talking about families, you're talking about children. You have the other dynamic where some of the enhanced support for food programs like SNAP that the federal government provided in benefits, again, as we've putting COVID in the rearview mirror, they've suspended, or stopped those enhanced benefits. So, that's a concern that the situation could get worse. Big debate going on now as part of the budget discussion. Do you provide free lunch across the board for the school children? So this food issue is maybe we're being too nice when we call it food insecurity. You may have a point there, but it's one we're really going to have to look more closely at and do it in a way that helps support our wonderful agriculture community in New York and our farms. We have lots of food being grown here. Let's have it be matched up with the people who are in need.
I mean, is it anywhere in your economic textbooks that taking care of human beings, making them healthier, making sure they eat right, have a job to go to, makes the society more productive and helps the economy?
Common sense, right? Yeah, I mean, you laid it out better than I could, and in the long run, more cost effective, right? When people are not healthy, partially because of diet, they end up with all kinds of medical conditions, and poor people that end up on Medicaid, which is a government program that the state and the federal government and local governments have to spend a lot of dollars on. So if you want to, in the long run, or if people have to drop out of the workforce, for health reasons, they're not being productive in the same way they would be if they were holding a job down. So our economic models, David, I think you're absolutely right. We don't always fully calculate the costs of not investing in people as far as healthy lifestyle, real job opportunity, right? And again, not just about giving folks a job, making sure they have a career, a lifetime of employment. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better than you just did.
And maybe a basic living wage, right? Because not everybody's going to be able to work on Wall Street. People work service jobs and others and try to take care of their children and have to work 2 or 3 jobs to do that. And then when you look at the cost of living increase over time, over multiple decades, the COLA that you might get in your check doesn't come close to keeping up with that cost of living increase.
Yeah, it's like a diet cola, right? It's right. Well, again, another one of the debates going on in New York about raising the minimum wage, and then do you index it to inflation, which other states have done, and I think is certainly a reasonable thought. The debate is if you're going to raise it, how high do you raise it, and how do you handle the indexing? It really gets back to not only the overall strength of our communities, but, it gets back to dignity for the individual, dignity for a man or a woman to provide for their family, to provide a future for their children. And an issue, as you know, I care about, and we talk about a lot on the show, retirement. Dignity in retirement. How many people don't have a pension plan these days, or limited savings through a 401k? That's one of the areas we guard so strongly. The fact that we have our public employees are part of a defined benefit pension plan, that's become, unfortunately, for the private sector, a diminishing number of folks. So on the public side, we are very careful about making sure we keep our plan well funded, because we want people to stay in New York. You know what? If you retire and you don't have adequate retirement income, that's another reason to leave the state. When you had a defined benefit pension, that's why and we've talked about it on the show in the past, David, 80% of our New York retirees continue to live in New York. And one of the main reasons is they know they can count on that defined benefit pension. The average pension, putting aside police and fire, which is higher, but for most of the, over 90% of the employees that retire from our system, it's about $26,000. It's not a huge amount. But boy, knowing you're getting it and putting that with Social Security and your personal savings, it can give you dignity and keep you living in New York. So a lot of issues about the social safety net that government needs to be a very important part of.
Yeah, and even with the state, though, they've added tier after tier after tier. So many of the current state workers aren't getting the same pension benefits as those from long ago.
Not even so long ago. Tier 6, believe it or not, I mean, it's maybe it's about a decade now, maybe a little less. I lose track. More than half of our employees now, to your point, are Tier 6, certainly Tier 5 and Tier 6. And they're working alongside people that are in the every now and then there's still a Tier 1 person around, believe it or not. Most are in Tier 4, but the benefits are very different. The benefits are less, and you have to work longer to achieve them. Another one of the debates out there is what's called tier equity, making Tier 6 a little more enticing for people to want to come to work in public employment and stay there. Some of the employers are arguing as well that we should deal with it. But another item you mentioned I have to put out there is the COLA. We have a very modest COLA for our retirees in New York State. Cost of living adjustment have to be out for at least 5 years, and there's a formula that caps the amount of increase that could be there based on inflation. But our retirees and RPEA, that represents the retired public employees in New York, they've made a very compelling case that, hey, it's time for that COLA for retirees to be looked at, especially for folks who've been retired for 20 years. And let's keep in mind, David, the reason our pension payouts are growing, one of the reasons is everybody's living a lot longer. Folks are living into their 90s now. It's not so unusual. So if you've been retired for a long period of time and you've had this very modest COLA based on a more modest pension based on salaries from, 15, 20 years ago, it's making it tough. All this costs money, though. So as trustee, I have to remind everybody, how much is it costing if we do these enhancements? What will be the impact on the pension fund? What will be the impact on the rates we charge our government employers? And most importantly for me, how can we be sure we're keeping our plan well-funded, meaning as close to 100% funded as possible? That's how we ensure retirement security, not just for today's retirees, not just for the folks who are going to retire in the next couple of years, but for the man or woman who's going to be working for New York State or City of Albany tomorrow and wanting to be sure they're going to have a pension, 25, 30 years from now. Those are the folks we have to worry about.
Well, just in case someone's riding around in their car and asking, you still haven't asked them how the pension fund is doing right now. How's it doing?
Well, we had a rough year. We value the fund on March 31st. I don't have the final numbers yet, but, last year we were up 9.5%. We were funded at 102.9%, not truly a fully funded pension plan, over 100%. There was a lot of market volatility from March 31st of last year, particularly the first two quarters. So we are going to have a negative this year. It won't be a severe negative. It's not like the Great Recession. We lost 26% value in 1 year. But we did have a slight negative. So, we're probably somewhere in the 90%, funded, which for a public pension fund is a very strong number. So folks don't have to worry that in any way there's any jeopardy of retirement benefits not being paid. We have the money, and of course we guarantee it with the state constitution as well. But this volatility that we're seeing in the markets, that's going to be with us. So the good news is we're well funded going into this challenging time. We are probably the most conservative fund in how we're positioned. Our long-term assumed rate of return, we dropped it to 5.9, under 6%. Almost all pension funds are much higher than that in their assumed rate of return. So we're going to be fine. But when the markets are choppy, it makes a challenge. But we have a diversified portfolio. We're not just in the stock market. So I feel we're in good shape. Is it quite as good as we were a year ago? No. And as I said earlier, the other challenge, and it's a good challenge, our payouts are increasing because when people retire these days, they're at a higher salary level. The pension payouts are higher. And as I said, people are living a lot longer. So we have to plan for more years to be paying out, these benefits. So, we're paying well over $1 billion a month out in benefits at this point. So it's
You got a lot to keep you up at night.
It's an obligation. Well, you know what? Yes, but you know what? This is the good part. When I am out there, especially in the capital region, we run into a lot of retirees that worked hard for the state or local government or school district. It's always a source of pride that they have confidence in what we're doing.
Well, and the stock market itself, I keep thinking about the cybersecurity threats. Are we in any danger here? Do we have to worry that, because if other countries, other places look to Wall Street as a place to disturb America?
Yes, but government also. I mean, you look at the ransomware attack in Suffolk County down on Long Island, which they're still trying to dig out from under. I've said to our team here, our IT group, and they are doing it, but I remind them all the time, they must put a priority on cybersecurity, because we retain a lot of very important personal information, and there are always attempts to try to hack in. I mean, that's not just Wall Street or business, but it's government across the board. So yes. That should keep us all up at night, because we have a lot of government-sponsored enemies out there, as we know globally. But you also just have a lot of people that are they're criminal intent and mischief. So this investment in cybersecurity and trying to keep one step ahead, that's going to be with us. That's not going to diminish. And they're always trying to be one step ahead of us. So we've got to try to be one step ahead of them.
It also goes to this new thing, this swatting thing. You know, we've seen these threats now all over the place at schools around New York State and around the country. It's scary, but there's got to be some sort of associated economic impact with that. People's time is lost to preparing for an emergency.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. It's scary. It's very scary. We had quite a number of incidents not that long ago. I think perhaps abated a little bit, but I'm sure we'll start to see it again.
We've been speaking with the State Comptroller of New York. His name is Tom DiNapoli, and he joins us regularly on this program, and we thank you so much for doing that, for sharing your thoughts, for helping us understand the financial situation of New York State. I know we'll have Alan back in the seat again the next time you're around, and maybe, just maybe, you'll join us in studio.
I enjoy doing that, David, so we will look forward to that. And thank you. It's always a great conversation.
The Capital Connection is a production of WAMC Northeast Public Radio. Capital Connection is hosted by Alan Chartock. You can listen to The Capital Connection anytime at WAMCpodcast.org or anywhere you get your podcasts. You can sign up for weekly show updates by subscribing to our newsletter, Airwaves, and by following us on social media at WAMC Radio. Thanks for listening.